Good afternoon, Politics 141. I'm Patricia McDonald with What's Your News. Today we have two special guests, ex-crime lab scientist Leah Jensen and Executive Director of the Justice Project, Emily Smith. Lately there have been news reports about problems occurring with forensic crime labs and the policies improving them at a state level. First we'll talk with Leah Jensen. She worked at the Universal Crime Lab of Dallas County, Texas. She was a lab scientist for 10 years, and she is here with her story.
Thanks, Tricia. I worked at the crime lab in Dallas County, Texas, and during my years I dealt with thousands and hundreds of murder cases, rape cases, and even going back and helping reopen cold cases. I worked with fingerprinting and forensic odontology, which is working with bite marks on victims to figure out the potential suspects. I've also worked with hair analysis as well as briefly with writing analysis, but I mainly worked with fingerprinting and odontology. I saw a lot of people come and go from Universal, and I saw plenty of innocent people get put away and two murderers let go. It was a tough job, long hours, emotional disputes, and it was rough when your workload was constantly being tripled, and it's been difficult. And when the state keeps adding more types of cases to your crime lab, there just isn't enough funding to go around, as well as workers to compensate for the additional work.
So Leah, before we get into why you left the Universal Crime Lab of Dallas County, why don't you just give us a brief rundown on how a typical case works with DNA analysis?
Well, Patricia, there are many different ways cases are handled based on the evidence that is brought forth to our crime lab. For instance, if you do fingerprinting, you take the DNA from a potential suspect, and say the DNA found on a blood stain on the victim or the suspect, and you add a restriction enzyme. And this cuts the DNA into smaller portions and fragments. So those fragments are then put into an electrical gel. We send an electrical current through the gel, and this makes the fragments want to flee to basically the core of the gel, stuff spreading out. And the smaller the fragments, the faster they move. After this is done, scientists put a coloring into the gel, and they look for similarities and repeats in the DNA, both of them. If there are repeats, you have potentially pinpointed a prime suspect. But a lot of times trouble arises because of lack of funding and lack of workers, because in order to get the DNA from the suspects or potential suspects, you need fingerprinters to do so. And many times there are clearly not enough human fingerprinters to do the job, and so we start relying on machine programs and on computers that are programmed by humans. But when you start relying on machines to match fingerprints with those on a computer in a database, sometimes problems arise. I actually have a video clip that gives a great example of a person who was continuously a suspect in the murder, but because the computer is missing his fingerprints in the database, he was constantly set free to kill more women.
Fingerprinting is the backbone of law enforcement and national security agencies. But a UC Davis law professor says fingerprinting has problems.
Very few fingerprint analyses are done by human examiners. We have to do millions of fingerprint analyses every year. We simply don't have enough human examiners to do it all.
By relying on computers, M. Winklereed says it brings the increased likelihood of letting a criminal go free. He points to the case of Jeremy Jones.
Here was a convicted felon who was repeatedly rearrested. His fingerprints were in the national database, but they missed them again and again, and virtually every time Jeremy Jones was released, he went out and murdered another woman.
But fingerprinting specialists here at the Department of Justice dispute those assertions. They say that current fingerprinting practices are not only accurate, but reliable.
Typically, the errors in this process can occur in three ways. One, the subject is not in the database. Two, the SID number that was given to us by the contributing agency was incorrect, or the fingerprint itself was not taken properly.
Doonan says if his agency receives reliable fingerprint data from law enforcement, the accuracy rate in matching a print is nearly 100%. Though new technology may exist on the horizon, those in California's Department of Justice are confident with the measures they have in place. Reporting from Sacramento, I'm Paul Flotenauer.
For more information, please log on to broadcast.ucdavis.edu.
I will now explain another form of forensic identification. This is called odontology. This is the use of bite marks for forensic science. It is probably one of the newer forms of forensic tools that we use in the crime lab, and it's also a very touchy tool to use. If a person is bitten, the suspect leaves not only teeth marks unique to their mouth, but also leaves saliva behind, which helps us later on. But this type of tool is most accurate when the bite marks are fresh and they are also deep. In using this, we have to first determine if the bite mark is human, because it potentially could be from a dog or some kind of other animal, and that could have nothing to do with the crime at all. Used for things such as suction marks, which is very unique to humans, marks from incisors and the canines, but never the molars, because that suggests an animal bite. Secondly, we have to make sure that bite mark found on a victim is actually timely with the case that we're identifying, and not just from previous occurrences. If a bite mark is beginning to heal, and say a crime was just made a couple hours ago, we know that's not consistent with the crime. To determine if the bite marks are even useful for the investigation. If, say, a bruise is created because of the bite marks, which is very likely, but not true bite marks are left, you can't gauge where the bruise came from. It could have come from a previous occurrence, once again, like if the bite mark's starting to heal. But if it's deep enough, you can make casts of the marks using dental gel, and you can potentially find your suspects. So using dental records is very helpful in identifying victims who have, say, been burned beyond recognition, drowned, or just been brutally mutilated. It helps because a lot of times those are the only solid parts of the body left to recognize. And also because everyone has dental work that's been done before, so they have record of the person. So you can probably find the dentine much easier than just looking at them. But where I started to get irritated is in one case we had in Austin. A woman was killed. She had several bite marks on or around her neck, which suggests sexual kind of abuse too. But the bite marks weren't fully deep enough to make a cast. So forensic investigators found food impressions that were in the house that the person actually bit into, made a cast of that, found a kind of a match, and they used that saying that was their suspect. And it doesn't make sense. How can you use, food to, it could come from anybody. Also, when we use odontology, we rely on digital imagery and computers, and mistakes can also be made there. And because you rely on computers once again to do it like fingerprinting, nothing is guaranteed.
Thank you, Leah. Please tell me a little bit about why you left the Universal Crime Lab.
Well, Kirsha, many forensic science labs lack procedures and rules for preventing biased results. When law enforcement begins to work too closely with crime lab scientists, it becomes more about framing somebody and locking them up versus the true justice of the scientific procedures that go on in the lab.
So how does this affect, in the courtroom?
Also, when you're in a courtroom proceeding, a forensic scientist talks about the evidence that they have found in the lab. But if they have a bias, they may exaggerate the truth and way far be what the truth actually is, creating misleading forensic testimonies. And studies show that this type of misconduct leads to 60% of wrongful convictions in the United States. Something must be done.
So what must be done?
What must be done, in my opinion, is that government needs to create better policies as to who they are letting work in these crime labs, first of all. I mean, giving more funding to labs so they can hire more people and maybe just in general create more crime labs in different high key areas that crimes occur. So the workload isn't so hard and it's spread out to different labs so we have more time and less pressure to get things, get many cases done at once.